Hello, and welcome to the 27th episode of my Failed Franchises Rail Operator series, as well as the 5th episode of my Welsh Operators mini-series. Today, we are looking at Keolis Amey Wales, an operator which only ran for 3 years. But were they any good, and should they, perhaps, be deemed as a failure? Do like, subscribe, and consider joining the channel for exclusive perks. Thank you. Firstly, we need to look at how Keolis Amey began operations. In 2016, 4 bidders were shortlisted for the next Wales and Borders franchise, the main franchise covering most Welsh services. These bidders were Arriva, the incumbent operator, Abellio, Keolis and Amey, a joint venture, and MTR. Arriva eventually pulled out in 2017, followed by Abellio after their partner Carillion collapsed in February 2018. Keolis Amey were thus awarded the franchise in May 2018, with their contract lasting 15 years. This franchise was the first Wales and Borders franchise to be awarded directly by the devolved Welsh Government, who specified that operations would be carried out under the government branding of Transport for Wales, hence why I will call the operator Transport for Wales today. The Welsh Government would own the company, whilst Keolis Amey would operate the franchise, with Amey also providing some infrastructure assistance for the South Wales Metro. The Wales and Borders franchise itself included management of all services within Wales. TFW would operate services from Holyhead and Manchester towards Cardiff Central and occasionally Pembroke Dock, Milford Haven and Fishguard Harbour via Swansea, with TFW also providing services towards Tenby as well as services on the North Wales coastline to Llandudno and Blaenau-Festiniog. Services on the Borderlands line from Wrexham to Bidston would also be provided by TFW, as well as services from Chester to Liverpool, with services also going to Manchester Airport. TFW would also operate the Cambrian coastline from Pwllheli and Aberystwyth to Birmingham International via Shrewsbury, and the remote Heart of Wales line from Shrewsbury to Swansea. Cheltenham Spa would also see TFW services, which would run into Cardiff via Gloucester. Finally, Transport for Wales would operate all local services in and around Cardiff, Newport and Swansea, including the Valley lines. The main infrastructure agreement with Keolis Amey was the South Wales Metro upgrade, an ambitious project which would see a metro-style service introduced across Cardiff. With this upgrade came new stock, worth £800 million. The new stock would include Class 231s, 398s and 756s for the Valley lines and metro services, with Class 230s for Borderland services, Mark IV Class 67 sets for long-distance services from Holyhead and Manchester, as well as Class 197s for most other services in Wales. This fleet upgrade would see 95% of the original fleet replaced by 2023, with the first new trains arriving for 2021. This original fleet which would be replaced would consist of Class 142 and Class 143 Pacers, Class 150s, Class 153s and Class 158 Sprinters, as well as Class 175 Corradiers, which, bar the Pacers, would all receive a full refurbishment under Transport for Wales. TFW would keep several Class 153 Sprinters for Heart of Wales line services. Elsewhere, TFW also confirmed that it would acquire 12 Class 170 Turbostars from Greater Anglia and 9 Class 769 Flex units from Porterbrook. Both would be used to increase capacity and to replace the ageing, non-PRM, persons with restricted mobility, compliant Pacer trains. The 170s and 769s both had intended introduction dates of 2019. The franchise began on the 14th of October 2018, replacing the former Arriva Trains Wales operator, which had ran for 15 years previously. The new franchise probably had one of the worst starts a new operator could. The first day of operation saw Storm Callum wreak havoc on the network, causing widespread cancellations and delays, whilst the Welsh language online service failed. Despite this, Welsh First Minister Karen Jones was optimistic about the new franchise, stating huge changes would occur in the next 5 years. By the 18th of October, passengers were already complaining about the new operator, with more delays and cancellations occurring, whilst overcrowding was still just as bad as under Arriva. However, the franchise was not even a week old, so these complaints were probably unjustified, but did portray the desperate need for new stock, as well as the South Wales Metro. What was justified regarding passenger complaints, however, was the disastrous service which occurred a month later, in November. More than a quarter of the Transport for Wales fleet was out of service due to a high number of trains needing repairs following Storm Callum. Services were cancelled throughout Wales, but passengers were hit hardest in Shrewsbury and Cardiff, whilst most TfW services were short-formed, leading to immense overcrowding. TfW apologised in newspaper adverts, suggesting that passengers would have to share the pain until the new stock entered service, whilst Network Rail also apologised. Despite the poor service, Welsh Government Minister Julie James praised TfW for their swiftness in response and blamed Arriva Trains Wales's years of underinvestment for the poor start to operations. TfW also blamed Arriva for the poor service, suggesting that they didn't know that 20 trains were damaged when the franchise was handed over from Arriva Trains Wales. TfW's chief executive, James Price, suggested that Arriva's fleet was not maintained quite as well as it could have been. Transport Secretary Ken Skates apologised for the disruption, reassuring passengers that trains would be repaired and normal service would be restored by the start of December 2018. Normal service was eventually resumed slightly later, on the 17th of December. However, going into 2019, TfW were once again under pressure, but this time by officials and ministers, for blaming Arriva for the recent disruption. Tom Joyner, Arriva's former managing director, suggested that it was the smoothest franchise handover he had ever seen, with TfW staff visiting Arriva's depots every week to look at how maintenance had been carried out. Plaid Cymru Assembly member Bethan Syed suggested that Arriva should not have been the ones to blame, whilst Network Rail's Bill Kelly apologised to the public for the disruption. The disruption itself did have an impact on passenger statistics, with stations on the Valley lines, including Merthyr Tydfil and Treforest, losing passengers due to the poor reliability, with Treforest losing 7.1% of passengers and Merthyr Tydfil 6.8%. By spring 2019, TfW's fleet refurbishment schemes were in full swing, with Class 150s finishing their PRM modifications and the Class 158s starting their refurbishments. However, Transport for Wales was still having stock shortages, leading to two Class 37 hauled Mark II sets being introduced from June 2019 to operate peak time services from Cardiff to Rumney. The first Class 230 and Class 769 units also began arriving to TfW in 2019, whilst the Class 170s began testing ready for introduction in September. Elsewhere in September, TfW were giving £194 million for investment into its stations. The investment will include all 247 TfW stations receiving Wi-Fi, better security and new shelters, with James Price highlighting how it was the most ever spent on Welsh stations. Swansea Station would receive a lot of the money, which went into new ticket facilities and new spaces for businesses. Cardiff received £58 million, which also included a new integrated bus station, whilst Wrexham and Machynlleth would also see improvements. October was a busy month for the firm, with the first refurbished Class 153s entering service with PRM modifications, whilst Transport for Wales gained 9 Class 153s from Greater Anglia and East Midlands Railway, entering service in January 2020. Elsewhere, TfW confirmed that 6,500 extra spaces on trains would be included in the Valley Line services from December, including more 4-carriage trains on peak time services. This also came with TfW requesting to the government to delay the new regulations, which would require all train companies to make trains accessible. The government allowed the Mark II and Mark III sets to continue operations, but the Pacer trains would only be able to run when attached to a Class 150 or 153, which was PRM specified. Also, TfW suggested that they had learnt from the cancellations from Storm Callum the previous year, with record resources invested by Network Rail into the network. As for passenger satisfaction with TfW versus Arriva, not much had changed. TfW had the same overall journey satisfaction rating with Arriva, lower train satisfaction but higher cleanliness and level of crowding satisfaction. TfW bosses urged passengers to be patient, with new Class 170s and 769s due to enter service by 2020, and then completely brand new stock to replace these and other stock by 2023. However, the intended withdrawal of the Pacer trains came under some scrutiny, with TfW wanting to withdraw the units before their replacements, coming in the form of the stock gap Class 769s and 170s entered service, leaving a huge stock gap for Valley Line services. The Class 769s had been delayed until at least early 2020 due to engineering and supply chain issues, with TfW needing the units to enter service before the 2020 PRM regulations came into effect, which would effectively leave the Pacers useless. Transport for Wales did have replacements in mind for the Class 37s, which would come in the form of more Class 153s hired from East Midlands Railway. These would enter service from spring 2020. November saw TfW announce 186 more Sunday services to its network, a 40% increase. TfW highlighted how they wanted a 7-day railway, with this being a significant step towards that goal. Blaenau-Ffestiniog and Pwllheli services would be increased, whilst Maesteg would receive direct Cardiff services. Cardiff to Swansea services would be more than doubled, from 14 to 29, whilst other Valley Line services would be increased. Good news also came in January 2020, when the Welsh Government confirmed that the Class 142s and 143 Pacers could continue to be used, with a sprinter unit with PRM specification. As well as this, the Welsh Government, overall, dropped Welsh fares by just over 1%, versus England's 2.8% rail fare rise. All fares in North Wales would drop by 10%, while similar discounts would apply to some Cardiff journeys. Fare rises occurred on fellow Welsh operators GWR and Avanti West Coast, with some TfW fares also rising in line with inflation. Things went particularly downhill in late January though, when Keolis Amey was fined £2.3 million for breaking Welsh language rules 6 times, including failing to provide announcements bilingually, not allowing the app to be Welsh, a not fully functioning Welsh website, English-only train tickets, and self-service machines set to English only. This also came with the transport-focused Rail Passengers Survey, suggesting that TfW passengers were some of the least satisfied in the UK, with a 79% satisfaction rating, and with TfW's value for money satisfaction rating falling to 48%. Following this, Keolis Amey were fined £3.4 million for poor performance on TfW services, including 8 weeks of constant disruption on the Aberdare line, accumulating to £1 million per quarter on delay repay compensation. Just before a certain pandemic hit the UK, Wales and Borders journeys decreased for the first time in 24 years, falling to 33.5 million journeys in 2019 versus 33.6 million in 2018, with this blamed on line closures, flooding, and less events being held at the Principality Stadium. Bad news also hit TfW, with the Class 769s once again delayed until at least the summer 2019, meaning the Pacers would continue to operate. This was due to reliability issues with the flex trains. Of course, after this, COVID-19 hit the UK, and we were plunged into lockdown, stopping most rail travel, putting the new trains and South Wales Metro upgrades on hold, and leaving TfW without any profit. This, in turn, led to the Welsh Government announcing that TfW would be nationalised by 2021, with falling passenger numbers, meaning that TfW would not be profitable for Keolis Amey, and would be best run under the government. Keolis Amey operations trundled on, finally bringing the Class 769s into service by November 2020, with the Class 142s finally retired alongside the Mark III sets used on Holyhead to Cardiff services. And on the 8th of February 2021, Keolis Amey TfW handed all operations to the new Transport for Wales Rail publicly owned operator. Amey would continue to construct the South Wales Metro, but Keolis Amey TfW would not bring forward the new stock or the South Wales Metro project. So, can Keolis Amey TfW be deemed as a failure? Well, they only lasted 3 years, so in that sense, yes. But of course this was due to factors far out of their control. Operations pre-COVID under Keolis Amey weren't amazing, however, with services still overcrowded and using ageing rolling stock, not PRM specified, so similar to Arriva. TfW did begin to refurbish its stock, refurbishing all Class 150s, 153s and 158s by the end of their operations, giving these ageing trains a new lease of life, with new disabled toilets installed in the 153s, 150s and 158s. So, I don't think they were a failure, and I think Keolis Amey would have successfully implemented the South Wales Metro project had COVID never happened. But, like many things, you just never know. Do let me know in the comments if you remember Keolis Amey TfW before COVID, and what were they like? Thanks for watching this 5th episode of my Welsh Operators mini-series, and another failed franchises episode. Special thanks to my first class members, Callum Martin Bell, Crispin McKee and John Williams, as well as my business zone members, Andrew Bowen, Anthony Harris, Anthony James Moore, ARK, Conor Grieg, Craig Mitchell 43, Gordon Walker, Jay Teco, Lewis C21, NJTE and Nat Transport Girl. You can get your name on this list from as little as £2.99 a month, and help me to make my videos. I really do appreciate it, so thank you very much. Also, thanks to everyone that let me use their footage for today's video. You can find their channels in the description or pinned comment below. Once again, thank you very much for watching. Check out my Twitter, Blue Sky, Instagram and Discord server, all linked in the description below. Thanks, and I'll see you soon. Goodbye.